If you're planning a winter of riding your bike, then you absolutely need to get your wardrobe nailed. If you have the right clothes, then cold and wet rides can be, if not enjoyable, at least survivable. However, if you've got the wrong outfits on and it's cold and wet, then you can be in for hours of frozen misery and, at worst, illness or injury. Now, it's not rocket science, but there are some tips that we've developed over the years to help us nail our winter wardrobes. Throughout this video, you'll see a lot of Altura's clothing, and that's because they've partnered with us to help bring you this video. However, these are tips that can apply to any clothing brand that you might be wearing. It's more about getting the right garments and getting kit that works for the conditions. I'll explain all in this video. Let's get into it. Now, riding through the winter, one of the things you'll learn very quickly is that actually it's all about keeping your core warm. Now, how do you keep your core warm? Through layering. It's a term you might hear thrown about quite a lot, but it really is vital to keeping you warm on the bike. And all good layering systems begin with the base layer. Now, the base layer is absolutely key because it's the layer that sits closest to your skin, so it's got really integral thermal and insulating properties. However, you want a base layer that is going to wick away moisture from your body, so it's not just sitting there and keeping you cool. Make sure to have a look at what fabric your base layer is made from and to make sure it's breathable, so it's getting that moisture away from your skin as quickly as possible. Now, base layers come in varying different sizes. They come from a thin spring or autumn version all the way through to a super thick thermal insulated layer, and you can pick whichever one you want depending on your conditions. On top of my base layer, I will then layer a long sleeve thermal jersey, something like this, the Icon jersey from Altura. These are really integral pieces of kit. They offer very important thermal properties for your cycling outfit. Something like this will come with a brushback fleecy fabric on the inside to help keep the wind chill off. However, what's vitally important from this item of clothing is that it is breathable, because the last thing you want to happen is you set off on your bike ride, 15 minutes in you start sweating, and then all of the sweat just sits there and doesn't leave your body. If this happens, you can find yourself very cold when it comes to descending down hills or riding at speed, because all of the wind is just chilling the sweat that's already sitting on your body. So our key advice with the long sleeve jersey is find something that will get that moisture away from your body. Now, on top of my long sleeve jersey, if it's dry, I'll always pair a gilet. A good gilet, like the Firestorm here, is an absolute must-have on any bike ride. If it's dry, you can wear a thinner one. If it's cold, you can get a thicker one for more thermal insulation properties. Now, you'll often hear riders say, why would I bother getting a gilet? It's just doing half the job that a jacket does. And I cannot explain how wrong that phrase is. A gilet is perfect for the exact reasons that I've just described. It allows you to insulate your core while allowing excess heat to vent away from your arms. And a good gilet will have a slightly thicker front to keep the wind off, because that's the direction the wind's coming from when you're riding. And it'll have a thinner or even a mesh back like this to let your excess heat vent away from your back to keep you from getting too sweaty. Now, obviously, there is a place in all winter cycling wardrobes for a waterproof jacket, and I'll talk a little bit more about these later on in the video. However, if it's raining, you should definitely wear one. I always opt for a packable jacket, because if it's not going to be raining all day or at all, like today, then I will simply fold it up and put it in my rear pocket so it's there for safekeeping. The general theory about cycling clothing layering is that if you heat your core, your extremities like your hands and your feet will follow. That's because if you heat the blood in your chest, it flows down to your hands and it flows down to your feet, keeping them warmer. Now, this is really important because gloves can be a very tricky layer to get right. You don't want to be one of those bike riders that heads out in Arctic mittens, because all you're going to do is lose dexterity when it comes to shifting and braking. I'll often see cyclists out there wearing insufficient clothing on their cores and on their top halves, and then trying to make up for it by wearing really thick mittens on their hands. All that will achieve is taking away your dexterity when it comes to braking and shifting, and you're probably still going to have cold hands, purely purely because you're not heating your core properly. If I get my top half layering correct, I can often get away with wearing a much thinner pair of merino gloves like these, which I much prefer because I like to feel in control of the bike and it's shifting and braking when I'm riding along. If you have long arms like I do, then make sure you get gloves with an extended cuff so you can pull them right up underneath the sleeves of your jersey. Nobody wants a little bit of their wrist to be exposed to the cold. That is my absolute bugbear. Now, obviously, if it's raining, then maybe a thin pair of gloves isn't quite going to do the trick, and you're going to want to get something like these thermo stretch gloves that are going to keep the water out. They're that bit thicker, and these use a neoprene material to help keep the water off your hands and have grippy bits all over the fingers. There are lots of different options out there for waterproof gloves, and they are worth getting if it starts raining. However, the benefit of these smaller gloves as well is that you can wear them underneath your thicker gloves if it does get really cold. Your feet can be a little bit trickier. Lots of riders complain about a numbing of their feet when they're out on bike rides, and this can be for a lot of different reasons. Firstly, they're the furthest extremity from your chest, and therefore it's harder to keep them warm. Secondly, the rough road surfaces can kind of send them to sleep a little bit when you're riding along. And finally, they are connected to lumps of metal by an often carbon sole in your cycling shoe. It's going to be quite a cold and tough experience for them. Now, I also suffer from a numbing of my feet when I ride, and one of the ways I've actually found to offset it is to wear a slightly bigger pair of shoes. Now, I know that might sound a little bit bonkers, but hear me out. By upsizing your cycling shoes, you can squeeze a thicker pair of socks in there and still have space to wiggle your toes. Cycling shoes tend to be quite slim fitting, and they'll often crimp your toes into a tighter space, and you won't be able to move them quite as much. And when you don't move them, you don't get the blood circulating. Overshoes do have a really important part to play in your cycling wardrobe, and you want to look for a pair like these night vision versions, which have a water resistant outer and a fleecy fabric on the inside. This will help insulate your feet as well as keep the water off, which is being spat up by your front wheel whilst you're riding along. Your head has lots of arteries and veins very close to the surface, and for that reason it dissipates heat very quickly. If it's hovering around 0 or even sub-0 degrees, then I would recommend you get yourself a thermal skull cap. Now, when it comes to skull caps, you want something which has a thicker panel across the front, which is windproof to stop you getting the dreaded brain freeze whilst you're riding along, and you want a little bit of extended coverage down over your ears to stop them getting nipped by the wind when you're cycling along as well. However, we do know that winter days can be that bit milder. I am of course talking about in the UK, not our cousins in North America where it is pretty much freezing all winter long. So if you are riding somewhere on a mild winter day, then you can always opt for the very stylish headband. The stylish headband offers many of the same benefits as the thermal skull cap, that windproof front panel and crucially ear protection, but it allows you to vent some heat through the top of your head so you're not getting too hot whilst you're riding along. Now, I'm actually quite into the old thermal headband. I think they're pretty stylish. There's something quite Eurotastic about them that I'm really into, but then again, I am the guy that wears his socks over his tights. Now, all of the advice I've just given you is great if you're planning on spending the winter training on your road bike or just doing some long winter miles. However, we know that is not the only type of winter riding that our viewers are doing. They're also commuting to work. So if you're a hardcore city dweller that commutes by bike rain or shine, then you need to dress for the type of riding that you're doing. And that is quite different from, say, going on a long training ride or riding in a group of mates on the weekend. If you have a fairly lengthy commute, maybe you're going into the city from outside of it and you may be doing between 20 and 30 Ks, then all of the tips I've just given you on winter bike riding layering are going to be spot on for that type of riding. However, if you're a hardcore city dweller who commutes to work whatever the weather, then you need to get yourself a decent waterproof jacket. That's because on those shorter commutes where maybe you're not going far enough to get your heart rate really raised or you're not getting a sweat on, a waterproof jacket is a great insulating item of clothing. When you hear of something being called a boil in the bag, it's easy to think of that as a negative. However, That's just a description of a jacket doing its job in the conditions that it's meant to do them in, and that is the pouring rain. You see, waterproofs are great for stopping the water from getting into your clothing and making you wet and cold, and they also lock your heat in, so they keep you nice and warm in the duration of the ride. Perfect for those wet rides or shorter commutes. You just might get a little bit sweaty. It's probably not the best idea to head out in the dark in all dark clothing. You're not going to be very visible. It's a much better idea to head out with some sort of reflective detailing on your items of clothing. I know when I drive that I pick out cyclists that have disruptive detailing like I do right now on this hurricane jacket or on my Icon jersey, much clearer. It's worth taking a look at the clothing that you're thinking of buying and seeing how it will protect you when you're riding in low light conditions. After all, it's not only your bike lights that can help you be seen when you're riding in the dark. So there you go, Cycling Weekly's essential cold weather clothing tips, and I hope this information helps you get out on your bike and enjoy your cycling this winter. If you have any tips of your own, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. We'd love to hear them. If you have liked this video, then please give us a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to the channel. It really does help us out. I'll be back soon with some more great content, and I'll see you then.